Hi, my name is Jono, and if you're new here, I do pencil drawings. As you can tell from the title today, we're starting with the eye. The original idea for this channel was to teach you how to draw, plain and simple, by showing you what I've learned in my practice throughout my life. I'm really excited to share the beginning of a series on this channel called The Anatomy of an Artwork, where I'm going to take you through episode by episode on different important elements of my artworks and art in general, focusing on anatomical things like eyes, skin, different body parts, and also things like understanding lighting and capturing liquids and so much more. I'm really looking forward to being able to share this with everybody. So if you guys are interested in the series, be sure to check them out as they arrive and come and draw with me. So the tools that I'm going to be using in this video: 2B mechanical pencil, and then a 2H mechanical pencil for the lighter shades, and a 8B normal pencil with wood. I'm going to be using blending stumps. These guys are great for blending. I'm going to be using some cotton wool and some graphite powder. So 9B graphite, ground it down myself because it goes darker that way. With that graphite powder, I'm going to be using makeup sponges as well as the cotton wool. And then lastly, the erasing tools I'm going to be using are my favorite, the kneadable eraser, super diverse. You can turn it into anything. You could sculpt it into a little rhino and then use that to erase, whichever makes you feel happy. Along with this guy, mechanical eraser, and then the sneaky little guy, Tombow Mono Zero eraser. I'd like to start my drawings with just outlining the area that I'm going to be drawing. I'm using a protractor to draw a perfect circle, and this is where I'm going to be drawing my eye. Next thing I like to do is try to get a feel for the nose and the brow, or at least in this case, just to get an idea of where the eye socket is going to be. A little thing I like to remember, just with the shape of the eyelids, is the top of the eyelid often has 2 angles or 3 planes, which makes it a little easier to get the shape right. And the bottom eyelid is 1 distinct angle or 2 planes. There's a little line over here, and this is just suggesting the eyelid ridge. It's really helpful to try and draw this because it just makes your eyes look that much more realistic if you include the thickness of the eyelids. And now I want to kind of sketch in where everything is going to be. Pro tip, eyebrows are always above the eye, and then get this line which is the edge of the face. What I want to do in this drawing is have it look very much like a photograph, so it's going to have that bokeh effect, it's going to be blurry in the background, and that just helps it make it look very realistic. Okay, and now we can begin to block out the shadows. We want to try and block out as much of the shadow area as possible, leaving almost exclusively the highlights as white paper. There's also a shadow underneath the eyelid, which is quite important to include. The light in this drawing is coming from the top, and we can block out just underneath the brow over here. I realized I made a mistake on the eyebrow, and that's kind of the value of this stage. You can very easily erase something if it's not looking right. Something to keep in mind here is, while we're working quite roughly with blocking things out, try to be as accurate as possible with where your highlights and shadows meet. Now that I'm happy with that, I'm going to grab my graphite powder and my tiny little makeup sponge and add some darker shadows. These shadows are as dark as it gets on the drawing, so I'm not going to be able to go back into this and pull out any highlights, so I'm just being very careful here with the areas that I choose. This is going to give me my darkest point to use as reference, and from here I'm using cotton wool to start shading and get a little bit of the shape of the eye. A note about the eyelashes is there's no consistent pattern. Try to be a bit random with them, really try to study as many references as possible. The eyelashes closest to the tear duct are usually very thin and a little bit shorter. And as we move into the center of the eyelid, the eyelashes start to become a little bit longer. Also in this case, I want that bokeh effect, or the shallow depth of field effect. So I'm going to try and draw the eyelashes in the center, sharp and in focus with as much contrast as possible. And as we move around to the end of the eye, closer to the background, the eyelashes are becoming less and less focused. You can also see that I'm using a blending stump here to try and get that blurred effect. This is a really powerful tool to get that out of focus look. And then just tightening things up with the makeup sponge. Getting a sharper line there on the lower eyelid and just a bit more contrast here. The makeup sponge can actually work very precisely. So I'm using this to get those soft, delicate reflections of the eyelashes in the sclera. And moving on to my favorite tool, the kneadable eraser. I'm going to use this to try and get an idea of what the iris is going to look like. So I'm just working randomly here, trying to let the eraser make the shapes. I'm not really thinking about it too much. I'm using a blending stump to draw these bottom eyelashes. The ones furthest away again are more blurry, and then I grab my 2B mechanical pencil and start carefully drawing in the eyelashes that are more in focus. Again, remember here that eyelashes are not in a pattern, they're quite random, often 2 or 3 of them stick together. If you can, try to include a little paw with the eyelash coming out of it. Going back in, I'm working on the eyelashes on the top of the eyelid and then just smoothing out some of the pencil work with some cotton wool. What I want to do here is to try and get some contrast for my highlights. So I'm actually going over most of the whites of the drawing with cotton wool very lightly and making sure that the highlights will pop and be the brightest part of the drawing. It's important to keep your highlights as clean as possible, so just work very carefully. And also another tip is to give reflected highlights a very sharp edge. This makes it feel like it's reflecting light and makes it look a lot more realistic. And now I'm going to do the same thing for the top eyelid, using my kneadable eraser to try and draw these creases in the eyelid. These creases are really subtle, so just work very carefully, try and study your reference and see how accurate you can get it. But also, don't be completely ruled by your reference. You're going to work incredibly slowly if you're completely bound by the reference. I've always found that it's a little bit better to just try and understand how the creases are working, spending a bit of time to try and visualize them before I start drawing them, and then mimic them in your own way. Back to the creases that I added with the makeup sponge. I'm just going to add a bit of highlights to these to make them a little bit more realistic on the top of the brow. And now I'm drawing in the eyebrow hairs. This is always a pretty fun part. It can be pretty challenging sometimes as well. In this case, the eyebrows closest to us are out of focus. So pretty soon I'm going to use a blending stump to try and blur these out a little bit. The closer forwards they become, the more blurred they are. So try and get an easy transition into where your focus lies. And then again, as they disappear into the background, they become more blurry. I'm jumping in with a mechanical razor here to get those sharper lines that I was talking about. As I said before, I'm trying to get a very shallow depth of field here in this drawing. So the area that's going to have a lot of detail and be in sharp focus on the eyebrow is going to be a very narrow area. And then I use my kneadable eraser here to draw a slightly more out of focus highlight on the brow. It's really a very quick and easy way of getting realistic texture. Okay, and now I'm just adding some details in the shadow of the eyelid. Working on the details at the bottom of the eyelid, this area is always very tricky. You can see some of my larger drawings. I put a lot of effort into trying to get this area to look perfect. It really makes a whole drawing come to life if you can capture the skin texture here well. You can take a look here at pupil, which was a nightmare for me to try and draw well. But I was really happy that I put the effort in, and I was super happy with these results. In this case, I've just taken what I've learned from all those previous drawings and trying to apply it here in a very quick way to render the skin texture. Okay, going back into these eyelashes at the bottom, using a blending stump to draw the blurred eyelashes, just making sure the contrast is rich here. So I'm going back in with my AP to really get those eyelashes looking dark and contrasty, and then using a mechanical eraser to give those eyelashes little highlights. The bottom eyelid is another opportunity for some realistic textures. If you can study this texture and get it right, it's going to make your eyes look very realistic. Things to look out for are the little highlights on the pores where you drew the hairs coming out. And because this area is very reflective, it's going to be reflecting the light from the sclera of the eye. You're going to see some interesting shapes here as well because this area is often wet and very reflective. So just try and keep that in mind when you join the bottom of your eyelid. And as we're moving further back, the eyelid, they become less and less in focus. An important little detail that can really make your eye drawings look realistic is this little highlight at the bottom of the eye where the bottom eyelid meets the sclera. There is always a highlight line here to indicate moisture, and if you can find an excuse to add this in, it's going to make your eyes just look that much more realistic. And now I'm just cleaning some things up, trying to keep the reflections of the top eyelashes looking sharp. And here we have the fun part of doing the iris. So this is something you can get completely lost in. I always have a lot of fun trying to do this. It's always a challenge for me every single time I do it. Things to remember here are there are lots of little diamonds or ovals, and to play around with the shapes inside the iris. These shapes are overlapping each other and there's a lot of depth in them, so really try and capture that. Try to capture the little fibers and try and challenge yourself to be as random as possible in the shapes that you're creating here. As soon as you start creating something more uniform, it's going to look a little bit artificial, so try to avoid that. Another overall principle with the iris is to imagine it like a donut. So if you shine a light from the left-hand side onto the donut, it's going to highlight the right side of the donut. So in this case, the light is coming from the left, and you can see here the lower right side of the iris is brighter than the top. Now it's time to start doing the capillaries in the eye. This is again another nice detail. Once you understand it, it becomes really easy and it makes your drawings look very realistic. So I like to use a blending sump that's just slightly saturated with graphite when I'm doing this, just because these capillaries are really soft, and if you draw them with a pencil, it'll just look a little bit too harsh and look artificial. Again, try to remember where your focus is. As you move further back on the eyeball, it'll slowly become out of focus and a little bit more blurry. I'm going back in with my mechanical eraser and my little makeup sponge to try and get as much depth and contrast as possible. Also, just some finishing touches, adding some texture above the eyelid here. And yeah, at this stage, the eye's pretty much done. I'm just having some fun with seeing whether I can capture these details out of my head. And there we go. I really hope that you could follow along with this tutorial. Eyes are so much fun to draw. I really absolutely love them. Before I end this video, I just want to give a quick shout out to this video sponsor, Squarespace. They've helped me out in a huge way, not only in sponsoring these videos and helping me maintain this YouTube channel, but also they helped me out in a huge way earlier on in my career. When I was just starting out, the idea of building a beautiful functional website seemed very overwhelming, and I didn't feel like I had the resources to do that. But after doing some research, I discovered that I could build something effortlessly that ticked all the boxes. I needed to have a beautiful gallery on my website. I needed to make sure that everything was working, that I didn't need to patch or upgrade anything, and to just make sure that my work was displayed the way that I wanted to, and if clients needed to get in touch with me, they could find me easily. And I felt that Squarespace did that effortlessly. I could register a domain with them and set up an online store, and most importantly, I could design my portfolio the way that I wanted to. Also, every time I got stuck, their amazing support team helped me out instantly. So if you're looking at building a website, give Squarespace a try, and if you decide that you love them, use the soft code, get 10% off your first purchase. Cool, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Drawing eyes is really rewarding for me. There's something about them that I just can't put my finger on, but yeah, they're possibly my favorite thing to draw, and I hope that you can fall in love with them the same way that I have. So yeah, if you found this video helpful, leave a like. It helps the channel out in a huge way. As always, thanks for the support, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.